This
background.
conference will now be recorded.
Thank you. Oh, if you could, if you're willing, maybe enter into the chat how you learned about this workshop, because we're trying to figure out how best to reach out to folks on upcoming events that we might be holding. And as you're doing that, just a little bit about me. I'm the former manager of Plum Conservation District. I actually moved to the Olympic Peninsula in 1989 and worked for both Plum and Jefferson County Conservation Districts back then for 1 year, and then I went to work full-time for Plum, and then just this past year came back to Jefferson. And my background is my educational background is in landscape architecture. I have a undergraduate and graduate degrees in landscape architecture, and I've been doing these workshops, presentations, classes since 1990. Lots of classes on natural landscaping and landscaping with native plants. And I gotta say, even though I've been doing this a long time, I still do not have the hang of this virtual presentation mode, so bear with me on that. I much prefer to have the interactive in person. So please mute yourselves during the presentation, but you don't need to turn your cameras off. When I can see some people, then as long as you're not sleeping, then I feel like I'm actually talking to people instead of just talking to my computer, which is kind of creepy to me. But anyway, that's what we'll be doing. And I'm gonna turn off my my camera, and we'll switch it to my screen here, and hopefully this works. So Sierra, it says I need to ask you to make me the presenter. Okay.
Sorry about that.
It's all right. So is everybody able to see my first slide here, or are you seeing the one with the notes?
We're seeing your notes.
Okay, how do I switch that?
When you share screen, it usually gives you an option of which one you're sharing.
I didn't see that option. Okay, here we go.
Better.
Does that work?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So away we go then. We're going to talk about planning a native landscape, but before we do that, for those who aren't familiar with conservation districts, I'm just going to give you a very, very brief introduction to that. So conservation districts are political subdivisions of state government, also referred to as special purpose districts, created out of the Dust Bowl to deal with natural resource conservation issues. And you can see the mission of Jefferson County Conservation District there. I won't read it to you. We were formed in 1946. We're one of 45 conservation districts in the state of Washington and about 3,000 nationwide. And one of the key things that distinguishes us from other governmental organizations is we're a non-regulatory governmental organization. So we don't make any regulations and we don't enforce any regulations. We work with people to help them be better stewards of natural resources. And one of the things that we do is we have a native plant sale, and that's what this workshop is coincides with. Hopefully, folks will learn something through this workshop and make better informed decisions when they order their plants. And also, we're trying to reach out to the average homeowner with our these workshops to help them be to landscape in a more environmentally friendly way. One point I do want to make with regards to the conservation district, we have to update a long-range plan every 5 years, and we're in the process of updating our plan right now. And so you can go onto our website and you'll see that later towards the end of the presentation. Our website, you can go on there and you can find our draft long-range plan. And if you have any suggestions for resources we should be focusing more on or things we should be doing differently, we'd really appreciate that. And here are the topics we'll be covering, and we will have a couple of breaks during the presentation. We'll be going to, hopefully we'll be done by 5:30, depends on how many questions we get. I do want to try to make it somewhat interactive, so if you have questions, you can post them in the chat, or during the break we can actually talk. I have 2 breaks scheduled for question and answer. All right, so first, I'm going to talk about why you should use or try to transform your landscape into a native landscape or a natural landscape. Cover the basics of site analysis, which is key to doing natural landscaping, and then some very basics of landscape planning and design. And the bulk of the presentation will be covering our common trees and shrubs, many of which that we're selling through our native plant sale, and talk about just descriptions of those trees and shrubs and how you might incorporate them into your landscaping. And then just a little bit about bare root plants and how to care for them, because that's what we sell through our plant sale is bare root plants, and they have to be handled a special way. And then a little bit about site preparation, planting, and maintenance. So just so you know, these topics, if you were in a landscape architecture program at a university, this would be 2 or 3 years of courses that you'd be taking. And so we're going to try to cover this in an hour or so. All right, so ideally, landscapes are gonna serve our needs, and those may be growing fruits and vegetables, herbs, things that we want to consume, and then a landscape's gonna be a place for recreating and relaxing and enjoying nature and hopefully being inspired by nature. So those are our key things that we get from our landscapes. And if we do it right, our landscapes are also going to be in harmony with the environment. So we're going to be hopefully enhancing habitat and biodiversity, managing stormwater, or at least not contributing to stormwater problems, and improving air quality. And I'll mention a little bit about what I mean by that here later. So this is a couple of examples of what landscapes are that don't meet those criteria I just mentioned. The one in the upper right-hand corner that may be a good place for recreating, and it's beautiful and all that, but it's not very sustainable and requires a lot of work to maintain a landscape like that. And then in contrast, we got the opposite extreme in the lower left-hand corner. That might be lower maintenance, so you don't have to spend as much time in that landscape, but you're probably not going to want to spend much time in that landscape either. It's not very inspiring, and it's not providing habitat. Pretty sterile landscape. And even though it's lower maintenance, you don't have to irrigate that, you don't have to mow it. Those types of landscapes They do sprout up with a lot of weeds, and the way people typically deal with those weed problems in those gravel landscapes is by spraying herbicide to kill the weeds off. So two extremes that we're not advocating here. What we're advocating is what we call natural landscaping, which is basically just landscaping with nature and adapting to the conditions that nature has given you to work with, and not trying to change those conditions too much, but figuring out what you've got to deal with and planting accordingly and designing accordingly. So the key things you have to do with this is you got to understand what the ecological conditions are, which is mostly the soil, topography, and moisture, and then also looking at climate and microclimate. And then as you implement your landscape, it's going to be predominantly native trees and shrubs and ground covers that you're going to be planting in order to have a natural landscape. And I'll talk about each of these things as we move forward here. But and then another key concept is to view site conditions as opportunities, not problems. This quote here: "Consult the genius of the place." That was Alexander Pope, who was a poet, English poet in the 19th century, when England was bucking the trend of France and Italy of their formal landscaping and going to a more natural landscaping style. So try to see everything as an opportunity instead of a problem or a barrier. So why are we advocating native plants? Well, it may seem obvious, but essentially native plants evolved here. They're adapted to our climatic conditions and our unique soils that we happen to have around here, as well as the native pests and diseases. Now, I say native because there are some non-native diseases that have come from other places, and they're causing a lot of problems with our native plants. But generally speaking, if you go with native plants, you're going to be pretty successful, and you don't need to know nearly as much as you do if you're planting something that isn't native. You basically you have to just figure out, does it like to grow in a wet area or a dry area? Does it like sun or shade? And if you can narrow it down to that, you're probably going to be successful with your planting. And then another really important factor to consider with native plants is that the wildlife evolved with our native plants as well. And this is especially important with a lot of our insects, birds. Most birds feed their young caterpillars, and many of the caterpillars are pretty particular about the species of trees and shrubs that they grow, that they live on, and those are predominantly native trees and shrubs. So we want wildlife habitat. We should be going with native plants. Okay, so if you're in the market for plants and gonna buy some plants from the conservation district, just a word of caution: we sell in bundles of 10, except for Salal, they come in bundles of 5, but everything else is in bundles of 10. So when you pick 2 or 3 species, you're getting 20 or 30 plants. So you want to do a little planning before you place that order, because you're gonna be going home with probably a lot of plants if you buy them from us. And here are the steps you want to take in your planning. And this applies to any type of landscape planning, regardless of whether it's a native landscape or not. But you figure out what your objectives are, figure out what your site has to offer, and then you try to match those two together. And if you're lucky, you can, without too much manipulation or too much in the way of sacrifices of your objectives. And you take it to the next level, which is a site layout, which is you don't want to get too bogged down in the details, with this. You're looking at very general concepts, spaces that you're laying out that serve different functions and have different patterns in your landscape and different plant communities. And then you get into the nitty-gritty of the detailed designs of each of those spaces that you've identified. And that's where you start identifying the actual species of plants that you're gonna be putting in and buying. What a lot of us tend to do, we go to the nursery. We might have 1 or 2 plants in mind when we go to the nursery. We might come home with a half dozen plants, and then we aren't sure what we're going to do with those. And that's not a big deal if you're going to the nursery and you're just getting a half dozen plants. But like I said, if you're buying them from the conservation district, you've got a lot of plants you need to figure out what to do with. Okay, figuring out your objectives. Everybody's objectives are a little different. The little boy there with the giant spud, that's my son Eric. He's a freshman over at Washington State University right now. And this list here is our list of wants and needs from our family when we started our landscape 20 years ago here. We like to grow our own vegetables and fruit and herbs and a lot of that stuff, and so that's pretty high on our list. And you can see the other things. Probably high on everyone's list is low maintenance. We don't like to be spending too much time maintaining our landscapes. We'd like to be enjoying them instead. We enjoy birds and butterflies. We want to attract them, and you can see the rest. It may seem unnecessary, but I encourage you to write down your wants and needs. That helps solidify those in your mind and helps you in your prioritization. And if there's more than one of you that need to decide what you're going to do with your landscape, then you might have to do a little negotiating. So write down those objectives. All right, so you figure out what it is you want and need out of your landscape, and then you go and you take a look at your site and see what it has to offer and what its limitations and capabilities are. And it's good to have a little sketch of your property. Doesn't have to be to scale, but something you can take notes on. Figure out where structures are, all the built resources that aren't going to be going anywhere, that you're going to have to work around. Just inventory all that stuff. If you've got a septic system, you want to know where that's at because you're going to have to protect that. You don't want to be planting trees and shrubs over that. Utilities, all those sorts of things. Vegetation that you might be needing to maybe want to eradicate or control, vegetation that you really want to save or enhance. Just have a base map that you can take notes on. And then one of the most important natural resources to consider in your landscape is the soil. And there's a variety of factors to consider with soil, but the most important thing is the texture. You want to know whether it's a sandy, gravelly soil that's well drained, or is it the other extreme? Do you have clay or organic soil that is poorly drained and maybe has ponded water in the wintertime? Or are you lucky and you have a silt loam soil, which has reasonably good drainage and good water holding capacity? It doesn't dry out quickly like the sandy, gravelly soil does. So those are the sorts of things you want to figure out, and you might have different types of soil on your property in different locations. It can really vary around here. And make note of whether or not the topsoil has been removed and you're dealing with subsoil. Is the soil compacted? These might be things that you can do some work to change. Okay. So then you go back to your site analysis. these are the sorts of notes that you might make on a site analysis. Where are the views that you want to preserve? Are there views that you want to screen? Where's the wind typically blow from? Is that an issue that you want to address? Do you want to try to block that view and have block that wind and have a little protection? What's the vegetation like? Where's your drain field, as I mentioned before? What are the slopes like? What's the drainage? Are there places where the water drains in pools certain times of the year? Make note of all those things. If you have Himalayan blackberries, you want to get on top of that before they take over. Okay, so that was the site analysis. Then you go back and you take a look at your objectives. And are you able to achieve your objectives with what your site has to offer? If you want to grow vegetables and fruit trees, you want to keep those close in by your house. Hopefully you've got good soil and you've got water available near your house for those things. If you have desirable views, then you want to preserve those. So what we can see here, there was a desirable view in this direction here, and that is also where the septic drain field was. And the safest thing to have growing over your septic drain field is grass. And so that's a good place to have lawn, and maybe you transition that lawn to a more wild meadow-like lawn, and that way you preserve your view, and then it transitions down into the wetland that's below. Had the wind that was blowing from the northwest, and also a view off to the north that was undesirable that you want to screen and provide a little privacy. So maybe you want to plant some taller trees, evergreens perhaps back there. They'll give you some wind protection as well as a little privacy, and then you've got a more pleasant area to occupy outside over here. Whereas if it's windy out there, you're not going to want to spend a lot of time out there. So this is a schematic plan, and the idea is you're just identifying these areas that are going to be treated a certain way. You're not getting hung up on the details of each one of those. Just the landscape architects would call these bubble diagrams. So you just create a bubble, and this bubble is serving a particular function. If you start getting into the details, and you'll get so bogged down you won't get anywhere. And then if you're on a city lot, so that last slide was actually a 2.5 acre lot. Now this one is of a city lot, and this actually comes out of the book. Well, I got it off of the Department of Fish and Wildlife website. I don't think they have it on there anymore, but Landscaping for Wildlife was the book by, the author's name escapes me right now, but he was a landscape architect and wildlife biologist who wrote the book. And then he did a second book called Living with Wildlife. And so these were all his little sketches of how you might go about doing this sort of thing on a city lot. But again, what you see is these bubble diagrams, just areas that are identified to serve a certain purpose. And this is a mix of a site analysis and a schematic plan. So here it says shady, quiet, good for sitting. Patio needs privacy, screen, possible conifers. So those are notes about the site analysis, and then some places it's taken a step further. Good place for play area, plus sandbox perhaps, low area potential pond. You get the idea. Don't get too much into the details. And then down below is got what is needed: more trees, conifer, shrub, and ground cover layers, native plants. You can make notes on that. as you comparing it with again, back to your objectives. And then this is taking that site analysis and schematic plan to another level. Just a little bit more detail, but again, you don't see any species identified in this plan here. Okay, it's got where the vegetable garden's going to go. There's a theme back here, rock garden, couple of themes, rock garden, Japanese garden, dry woodland back here, evergreen hedge. Doesn't say what kind of evergreen. Tall shrubs over here, native woodland around the pond, fruit trees in here, hummingbird garden. Okay, you do this and you can get through this fairly quickly. If you start worrying about the individual species, then it gets a lot more difficult. And then here's where you have the individual species. This is your planting plan. And most homeowners aren't going to do this. This is a level of detail you would have a landscape contractor go into for you. So if you're hiring someone to install your landscape, you want them to draw it out for you so that you know you're both on the same page, and you can be in agreement as to what's going to get planted there, and you have a much better understanding of what the future of your landscape is going to look like. Most of us, when we do it ourselves, we get the gist of it, and then we go out and we start implementing it. Okay, so back to that 2.5 acre parcel. 2.5 acres is a lot of land, and a lot of folks who come from who've lived in a city most of their lives, and they move to the country and say they buy 2.5 acres or even 1.25 acres. They feel a need to landscape, and this isn't so common in Jefferson County, but in around Sequim, where there's a lot of old farmland that's being developed. It's all open, and a lot of people, when they buy a, say, 1.25 acre or 2.5 acre lot that's former pasture or hayland, they think they have to landscape the whole thing like a city lot, and don't go there. Divide your landscape up into zones. The city lot is basically this red and orange area up here, zones 1 and 2. The zone 1 is the people place. That's where we spend most of our time. That's where your landscape that requires high maintenance is going to be located. If you've got lawn, it's going to be in zone 1, maybe out into zone 2. Anything that has to be irrigated is going to be in zone 1. If you have fruit trees, keep them in close, zone 1 or 2. I can't tell you how many times I've seen where people will plant they'll get half dozen or a dozen fruit trees, and they'll plant them as far away from their house as they can possibly get them. They're creating an orchard way over here. Well, what happens when it's way over there? It's neglected. You can't water it very well. You're not going to be doing the pruning you need to do. And the deer's going to do the pruning for you, and the fruit doesn't get picked. It just gets neglected. So keep that stuff, the things that you want to enjoy, keep it in close by the house. And then this orange is kind of a shared space between where we spend most of our time and high maintenance is, and this wild area out here where hopefully you don't have to do anything other than a little bit of enhancement. And it's a psychological and physical transition from this more highly manicured part of the landscape to the wild part, and it's also a shared space for wildlife. I've got another slide that illustrates this here as well. So here you can see where the house is. That's zone 1. That's where it's high maintenance, high disturbance for wildlife. And then way out here where these trees are, That's the wild space zone 3, low or no maintenance and minimal disturbance to wildlife. That's a refuge for the wildlife. Our refuge is over here, and then we've got a transition between the two that both of us can enjoy and have our safe places to go back to. You put out bird feeders or some sort of water feature by your house, and you can attract birds and other wildlife that you wouldn't normally see in around your house because they don't like to hang out with us nearly so much, but they'll come and visit, and you get to enjoy them too. So that's just another illustration of those zones. And back to this, so you're going to focus most of your landscape attention in zone 1. That's, like I said, if you were doing a city lot, it's zone 1 and 2 here. And don't get distracted by all this other land that you've got out here. If you're lucky, it's already intact ecosystem out here, and you don't have to do anything other than enjoy it. Like it has here. You can see you got the trees, and you got some snags and things like that. You don't have to do a thing out there other than enjoy it. All right, so once you've got that schematic plan figured out, and hopefully your site matches up well with your wants and needs, that's when you start looking at your planting plan. And if you're trying to install a natural landscape or trying to landscape with nature, you want to minimize your lawn area. Lawn is not very natural and requires a lot of maintenance. It might be easy to get it established, and it's a good ground cover, but it requires maintenance throughout the spring and summer. Then the next thing you're going to want to look at is, do you want a tree or a shrub? And always keep in mind the mature size of the plants too. So, and I'll talk about this a little bit more here, but you kind of go through a decision tree, no pun intended, but tree or shrub, again, keeping in mind mature size, evergreen or deciduous. That's how you narrow down your selection. And then you're going to want to group the plants that you're putting in according to their habitat requirements. So if you have certain plants that require high moisture, keep all of those together. And preferably they're in a place where the soil has high water holding capacity, like a clay soil or a silt loam soil or an organic soil. If you have a sandy loam or sandy gravelly soil, then it has very low water holding capacity. It's totally different species that will grow in a soil like that than will grow in a clay soil. But a silt loam soil, then you've got a lot more flexibility in what you can do. And then also, of course, you want to be thinking about whether the plants tolerate sun, need sun, can tolerate shade, prefer shade, and how tolerant they are of wind. And again, with native plants, these factors aren't nearly as critical. But if you do figure this out, you're almost guaranteed to be successful. With non-native plants, you got to do a little bit more research into what you're planting and where you're going to plant them. Okay, and I have a rule of thumb that I follow whenever I'm putting a plant in the ground. I try to consciously think of at least 3 functions that plant will serve by being in that particular place that I'm putting that plant. And here's just a list of some of the many functions that plants serve. And if you go through that little mental exercise, chances are you will avoid making a mistake. You put a plant in, and again, be thinking about mature size of the plant. But If you go through that exercise, you'll most likely be successful in putting the plant where it doesn't have to be moved, doesn't have to be trimmed, or isn't going to cause problems later, and it's going to provide the benefits you're looking for. Microclimate modification is an important one, and I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a bit. Okay, so here is a website that King County has, and it's the address is up here. I'll leave it up here for a while if you want to try to write it down, but you could probably just Google King County native plants and you could find this also. But it's a King County native plant guide. Maybe Google that and you can find it. But it's an interactive website. It's a real handy website. So you can see down here, search all plants, and it's all just native plants, but there are different parameters you can select. Plant type, you can click on tree or shrub, ground cover, grass-like, or vine. Pick one of those, and then you pick either deciduous, evergreen, or perennial. And then moisture requirements. Again, getting back to what I was just talking about. Do you have an area that's sandy, gravelly soil? Then you're probably going to say dry. If it's an area that has ponding water in the wintertime or a clay soil, then it's probably going to be wet. You pick one of those things, sun exposure or shade, and then there's some other factors you can select too, and it'll pop up a list of plants that meet the criteria that you're querying for there. Really good interactive website. And then they also have descriptions of the plants as well. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? So for right now, try to limit your questions to what I've just covered, the identifying your objectives, doing site analysis. If you have questions about soils, I could try to answer that. Schematic plan. After this, we're going to start talking about the actual plants themselves. All right, no questions in the chat. Okay, moving on. So I'm going to go pretty much one by one through our common native trees and shrubs. I'm going to start with the conifers. So here's the list that we'll be going over. And I think we are selling almost all of those, if not all of them. So evergreen, conifer trees. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Douglas fir. That's our most common tree. Very fast growing evergreen tree. All the Douglas fir needs is sunshine to grow. It'll grow in extremely dry sites and be very happy there. It does not tolerate inundation and waterlogged soil, but if you have good moisture, it'll grow very fast. 3 feet a year is not uncommon for Douglas fir, but it has to have sun. In fact, you've probably seen these big Douglas fir trees, and the only live vegetation on the tree is the very top. Maybe a quarter of the tree has live canopy. Everything underneath has been shaded out. It does not tolerate shade, and these lower branches and limbs die and fall off. So that's the Douglas fir. And then the grand fir looks somewhat similar to the Douglas fir, but it's actually tolerant of shade, but it'll grow in full sun as well. So Doesn't grow in quite as dry conditions that Douglas fir can tolerate, but the two throughout the North Olympic Peninsula, you'll find the two growing side by side in many areas. Douglas fir doesn't grow as fast as, Grand fir doesn't grow as fast as Douglas fir, but again, it's one that will grow in shade. Both the Grand fir and the Douglas fir are grown as Christmas trees too. So these are big trees. When they're mature, they're going to be very, very tall. A couple more conifers, the western red cedar and western hemlock. Both of these species like shade, especially when they're young. They can tolerate full sun once they're well established, but when they're getting started, they really prefer to have some shade. In natural conditions, they would sprout up in the understory of Douglas fir. Douglas fir would come in first after a big windstorm or a wildfire. When there's plenty of sunlight, the Douglas fir would grow, and then the hemlock and cedar would grow in the understory. They both like more soil moisture than the Douglas fir needs to have, and the Grand fir needs, but they also can grow in fairly dry conditions also. Neither of these are grown as Christmas trees, and both will grow in fairly wet conditions, especially the cedar can grow in some pretty wet conditions. Big downside of the cedar is deer really like to browse on the cedar. Again, these are long-lived, very large trees. And a couple of trees that like to grow along shorelines and in wet areas, the shore pine and the Sitka spruce. Here you can see a shore pine growing in a exposed windy area. The Latin name is Pinus contorta contorta, and you can see why. When growing along the shoreline in the wind, it looks almost bonsai-like. Shore pine, all it needs to grow and grow well is sunshine. It doesn't tolerate shade. It doesn't tolerate a lot of competition from other trees. It'll be reaching out to get all the sunlight it can. But it can grow in really dry, sandy, gravelly soils, as well as soils that get waterlogged and inundated in the wintertime. So pretty hardy tree. I have found in my experience, the shore pine really collects a lot of snow. So when we get a heavy wet snow, it really piles up on the shore pine, and big branches will break off. So keep that in mind. And it's one of our smaller conifer trees too. It typically grows less than 40 feet tall. And then Sitka spruce. Sitka spruce will grow in some pretty wet areas. Chimacum Valley, it does well in the Chimacum Valley. Fast growing tree. And this is one that deer do not seem to bother. It's stiff, prickly needles, and in fact, there's a technique that former board member from Plum Conservation District and forester Joe Murray figured out a few decades ago that when planting a Sitka spruce and cedar in the same hole, when you're planting these little seedlings, if you plant the two side by side, then the Sitka spruce will provide some protection from deer browse. The deer will come along to browse on the cedar and poke their nose on the needles of the spruce and not like that and walk away. And so you just wait until the cedar gets big enough to withstand browse, and then you can lop off the Sitka spruce, and that's a good way to have some success growing western red cedar where there's heavy deer browse. Okay, moving on from the evergreens to the deciduous trees. We've got 3 maples that grow around here. The big leaf maple, which aptly named, has huge leaves and a big crown. Big leaf maple is a very big tree, fast growing, takes up a lot of space, produces a tremendous amount of leaf litter, and probably not very well suited to the home landscape because it requires so much space and produces so much biomass and leaf litter. 2 other maples that will work in just about any landscape are the vine maple and the Douglas maple. Douglas maple is also referred to as Rocky Mountain maple. These 2, vine maple and Douglas maple, are small trees, sometimes multi-stemmed. The vine maple can be multi-stemmed. Vine maple is known for its outstanding fall color. Actually, the big leaf maple has excellent fall color too, golden color in the fall. The vine maple tends to turn orange, yellow orange, very early, oftentimes in August, and keeps that fall color for a couple of months. Douglas maple has nice fall color, doesn't last as long as the vine maple does. Vine maple will grow in shade and actually prefers a sheltered area. The Douglas maple will grow in sun or shade and leaves out about a month before the vine maple does. Vine maple, Jefferson County, probably almost anywhere you could grow the vine maple. If you're in a more exposed, windy area, vine maple is probably not going to be too happy there, but the Douglas maple would do okay.
Hey, Joe, may I ask a question?
Yes.
So I've got a number of maples on a rural property in Jeff County, and I don't know the species. They don't appear to be the big leaf because I know the big leaves are huge. They have they're all in decline. They've got moss growing up their stumps or their trunks. And is there a kind of a maple blight that is part of the county, vernacular, or do I just have something unusual going on my property?
Short answer is I don't know. There's a lot of
fair
things
enough.
What's that?
That's fair enough.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of things that have been happening in recent years with a lot of our native trees. Madrone have been suffering. Big leaf maple has there is something that's been affecting the big leaf maple, but it's common. Big leaf maple is and vine maple, the moss, and you go out to the rainforest. They're the hosts for the moss that hangs from the trees, especially the big leaf maple, and that's probably not doing any harm at all to the tree. And a side note on that, lichen grows when you see a lot of lichen growing on a tree, which is like moss but usually light colored. A lot of people think that that's doing damage to the tree, when in reality it doesn't do any harm at all to the tree, to the host plant. In fact, it adds some micronutrients as it falls off the plant. But what happens is, as the host plant declines in vigor, then the growing conditions improve for the lichen. So the lichen's just using the branches as a structural support, and as there's less canopy and fewer leaves, then there's better growing conditions for the lichen. So it looks like the lichen is killing the tree off. But if you've got a lot of lichen, that means you've got good air quality. So that's a good indication of something good in the environment.
I appreciate your answer. Thank you.
Speaking of air quality, I was going to mention it earlier, and I forgot. One of the things that your landscape, how you can make improvements to air quality. just planting trees. That's going to help sequester carbon dioxide. So the more trees you can plant, the better. But also, the less lawn you have and the less mowing you're doing, the less pollutants you're putting into the atmosphere. Lawnmowers, gas-powered lawnmowers are not very efficient at filtering out pollutants, and they make a lot of noise too. So reduce your lawn and plant more trees, and you'll improve air quality. Okay, a couple more deciduous trees. We got the Pacific crabapple. Likes to grow in our organic soils, like in the Chimacum Valley or wet areas. I would not consider that to be a very desirable plant for like a city lot. The vine maple and the Douglas maple are very attractive and small trees that will do well anywhere. The Pacific crabapple is a pretty wild looking small tree, but it does have nice blossoms, just classic apple blossoms. And then the fruits are these itty bitty tiny crab apples that mature very late in the season and actually provide a good food source in the fall, going into the winter for birds that like to eat fruits. So there's a place for crabapple. It'll grow in wet conditions and it provides good habitat. But as far as being ornamental, not high on my list. The red alder, very fast growing tree, pioneer species, a nitrogen fixer. So as long as there's sunlight, the red alder can grow. It's one that would come in after major disturbance and can take atmospheric nitrogen and fix it in the soil, so it improves the soil and growing conditions for other species that'll follow, and grows very fast. Again, not a very ornamental tree. Tends to drop a lot of branches, very susceptible to wind. Not one I would plant anywhere near my zone 1 or zone 2 in my landscape. But if you've got a place for it, it's very good for wildlife. I mentioned how birds feed their young insects and caterpillars. Well, red alder is a host for a lot of those, so really important for our birds. One more, I'll just make a comment about another species you might want to, a couple of species you might want to avoid. Cottonwood. Cottonwood grows extremely fast, but again, it's very weak wooded and drops lots of limbs and can be damaging. But if you got lots of property, then you might have a place for cottonwood. Willows will do the same thing. And then black hawthorn is one that I would be leery of, even though it's attractive small tree, has really nice fall color, produces fruits that the birds really like. It has really large thorns that can be very damaging and not pleasant to be around. And bitter cherry is one that I would recommend staying away from. Bitter cherry, like quaking aspen, forms thickets and spreads, the roots spread out and send up new trees. And if it doesn't have competition, it'll keep growing out rather than up and taking on more and more territory. It'll cross over to the neighbors. It'll go invade septic drain lines. Be careful with bitter cherry, and the same for quaking aspen. Okay, moving on to shrubs. There's my son Eric again, observing my favorite shrub, the red flowering currant. So we'll start with late winter with the very first plant to leaf out and bloom around here, the Indian plum or oso berry. So Indian plum will typically start leafing out and blooming in late February, and and really prefers to grow in the understory of deciduous trees. So if it's growing underneath alder or schooler's willow, it'll be leafed out for a couple of months or more before the overhead canopy starts to shade it. That's what it really likes. And then it produces these clusters of fruits that start out green and then yellow and pink and orange and eventually get to a dark plum color. And they're really tiny, but when they're fully mature, they look almost identical to Italian plums. Same color, same shape, but they're really tiny. And at least at my house, once one or two start to mature and develop that color, and you oftentimes get multiple colors in a cluster, which is pretty cool looking. But once they start to mature, the cedar waxwings arrive and gobble them up. And a bonus of that, the cedar waxwings eat those fruits, and then they spread the seeds around, and you get some volunteers that will sprout up, and you get some free plants. Then the red elderberry blooms a little bit later in the spring, and I've got the red elderberry and the blue elderberry here for contrast. Blue elderberry, it blooms much later, probably a month or two after the red elderberry does. And the red elderberry is more like a small tree, whereas the blue elderberry is like a small tree, and the red elderberry is a multi-stemmed large shrub. And with obviously with the red fruits that mature in the summertime, and the birds will eat those all up, and they'll be gone by the end of the summer. The blue elderberry fruits, they don't mature until the fall, and again, they provide a good source of food for birds going into the late fall. Again, the elderberries, as far as being ornamental, not high on my list, but they do have a place. If you got the acreage for it, you can fit them in a natural landscape. The Indian plum is kind of wild looking, but it is a smaller shrub, so there you can fit that in a small landscape. Okay, the red flaring currant. That, if there was only one plant I could have, it would be the red flaring currant. It starts blooming typically in March, and will bloom all the way to May. Long bloom period. Once it starts blooming, the hummingbirds arrive, and red flaring currant is extremely easy to grow as long as you have a well-drained soil. It does not tolerate wet feet. And the more sun you have, the more blossoms you're going to get, and more blossoms and more fruits. And this is one that the cedar waxwings really like too. But it only grows maybe 8 feet tall and 10 feet wide or so when it's mature. Grows very quickly, and you'll get lots of volunteers because the birds will spread the seeds as well. And then moving on a little bit later into the spring, we get the serviceberry starts to bloom. Here you can see the serviceberry with the white blossoms. Serviceberry is attractive, I think, in all seasons. Winter, not so much, because obviously it loses its leaves, but it has very nice fall color, handsome foliage in the summertime, nice white blossoms. And then the fruits you can see, which are edible and make an excellent jam. Saskatoon's another name for the serviceberry. Serviceberry can be a large multi-stemmed shrub or a small single trunked tree. It'll grow in the sun or the shade. What it prefers is being on the edge where it gets a little bit of sun, a little bit of shade. That's the ideal site for the serviceberry. Both the red flaring currant and the serviceberry are suitable for any type of landscape. They're well-kept trees or shrubs that don't have too wild and messy of a look to them, and are small enough that you can grow them on a city lot. And I just saw somebody asked about plants that deer won't eat. If I could tell the truth to you about that, then yeah, deer will eat anything. So I'm not even going to even try to pretend to say that some of these things are resistant to deer. You can look those things up and you'll see a list of plants that are deer resistant, and I've seen deer gobble them up. So I don't even pretend to tell you what's deer resistant, what isn't. Couple more shrubs that these are broadleaf evergreens, the Oregon grape. We got the tall Oregon grape, which is also sometimes called holly leaf Oregon grape, and then the low Oregon grape, sometimes called dull Oregon grape. The blossoms are essentially the same on both the tall and the low. The fruits are more or less the same. The low grows like a ground cover. They both spread, so keep that in mind. They're not going to, you put in a tall Oregon grape, it's going to send up new plants and it's going to expand its territory. Not necessarily real aggressively, but it will not stay put in just that one spot. They're very hardy plants. They'll grow in some very sandy, gravelly, poor soils. The tall Oregon grape likes more sun than shade, but it's tolerant of shade. The low Oregon grape likes more shade than sun, but it can tolerate sun as well. And a nice effect that oftentimes you get when the low Oregon grape is growing out in the sun, the new leaves will have kind of a bronzy color, and they'll turn that color in the wintertime as well. And again, both of those are suitable for small lots and nice, tidy landscapes. Moving on into late spring, we get the mock orange and the ocean spray start to bloom. Both of these are very fragrant shrubs, a little larger growing than some of the others that I've mentioned. They'll grow 10 or 12 feet tall and wide. Pretty easy to grow. Will tolerate some pretty dry, sandy, gravelly soils. And again, very fragrant. A couple of species you might want to be a little bit careful with, the thimbleberry and the Nootka rose. And I say that because they're thicket formers, they spread. The thimbleberry not nearly so aggressively as the Nootka rose, and the thimbleberry does not have thorns. It's got these big, exotic, almost tropical looking leaves, which adds a very interesting texture to the landscape. White blossoms in early summer, and then the fruits that look like thimbles, where name comes from. Then the Nootka rose will grow, and the thimbleberry, both of these will grow in sun or shade. Thimbleberry likes more sun than shade. Nootka rose will grow anywhere. Sun, shade, wet, dry, anywhere. And it'll grow and it'll keep growing and growing. And very difficult to control and eradicate. So great for a hedge, but otherwise it can take, it can be very invasive. So be careful with the Nootka rose. Snowberries, same thing as the Nootka rose. Thicket former, spreads, grows in sun, shade, wet or dry. You see it here growing around this bench, and it's very attractive looking. But over in the left, lower left-hand corner, that's what it looks like in the wintertime. Loses all its leaves, and it's just a bunch of sticks. This year seemed like a bumper year for the fruits on the snowberry. There's a lot of snowberry fruit out there for some reason. And then upper left-hand corner, you can see a hedge of snowberry and Nootka rose. This is very common. The two often grow together. And again, make an excellent hedge And if you mow along the side of it, you'll keep it from spreading by mowing it. But it'll want to spread if you let it. But provide some good habitat for quail and ground nesting birds. And also those two species, the Nootka rose and the snowberry, are good for planting on unstable slopes or areas where it's difficult to get plants established, and maintenance is going to be a problem because they can grow anywhere and require minimal maintenance, and then they will spread, and the roots will help bind the soil. Here's a couple of plants that like to grow in wet areas: the Pacific ninebark and black twinberry. They're both shrubs, grow 10 or 12 feet tall and wide. The black twinberry starts blooming in the spring and blooms throughout the summer, has these pairs of yellow blossoms that turn into pairs of the fruits here, and you'll have both fruit and blossoms on the plant at the same time. And actually the fruits are a little more conspicuous looking than the blossoms are. Then in contrast, the Pacific ninebark, it has these snowball-like blossoms that last no more than about a week, and then they turn brown and develop seed heads. Both of these will grow in real wet areas. And red osier dogwood, known for the red stems in the wintertime, but actually I think it's an attractive plant at all times of the year. It's got nice, handsome foliage in the spring and summer, and beautiful fall color, reds and purples in the fall, and then of course the red stems in the wintertime. And red osier dogwood, just like the ninebark and the twinberry, it will tolerate very wet growing conditions. All right, I'm going to skip the questions right now because we're running a little bit late, and so we'll go through the rest of this and then take questions at the very end. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly go through the plant material options here that you have. When you buy plants, you can get seed, cuttings. Those are your two least expensive plant material options. Then there's bare roots next on the list, and then you get into the different container stock here. We sell the bare root, and so that's what I'm going to talk about here mostly. And I just want to point out the best time to plant is in the fall. And this graph, this is a precipitation graph from SQUIM, so don't worry about the numbers, but the pattern of the graph is pretty much the same throughout the North Olympic Peninsula, or even Western Washington for that matter. And the point of this is it doesn't rain much in the summertime. It starts raining in October, and November is a real wet month. December rains in the wintertime. And when's the growing season? Growing season's in the summertime. Native plants are adapted to these conditions. If you plant in March or February, the ground is still really cold after going through the winter, and the plants are going to be shocked. They're not going to develop roots readily because the ground's so cold, and the rains are starting to stop, and the plant's going to be coming out of dormancy as the rains are stopping. You plant in the fall, the soil's still warm enough that roots are going to develop. The plant's starting to go dormant, and the rains are coming. So if you're going to be planting somewhere where you're not going to be able to do very much maintenance, you can't irrigate, I highly recommend you plant in the fall. And so now you're all probably saying, okay, well, if you recommend planting in the fall, why do you do your plant sale in the wintertime? It's because we do bare root plants, and the only time you can sell bare root plants is in the wintertime. But there are options, and I'll talk about those here real quickly. So bare root and plug stock, Salal we're selling as plug stock, which is this right here. Very compact roots and a little tiny bit of potting soil that's connected to it all. But the advantage of bare root is it's inexpensive, lightweight. If you do mail order plants, almost certainly going to be bare root plants that you're going to get. They're shipped all over the country, and their bare root stock is fairly easy to and quickly to establish. The disadvantage is you have a limited choice in the species that are available. The big disadvantage is you can only get them in the wintertime. And because they are bare root, they are pretty delicate and vulnerable to desiccation. So you gotta treat them very carefully, and I'll talk about that here next. So if you do get your bare root plants, say you order some plants from the Conservation District, you're gonna want to do one of three things when you get your plants. You're gonna wanna go out and plant them right away in their permanent home, pot them up. If you don't have pots and potting soil, then maybe you can heal them in, but you got to get the roots covered. You can't just let them sit behind the garage for weeks. They're going to dry out, and you're not going to have success. So if you can't plant immediately, and you do have to store them for a little bit, try to store them for less than a week, and keep them in a cool, dark place where they're not going to start to break dormancy. And a place where it's not going to freeze, and they'll keep for another week or so without any issues. Also, try to make sure that the roots stay moist, don't dry out. You don't want them saturated with water, but you don't want them to dry out either. So say you do pot up your plants. Keep in mind that this is temporary. And I've seen many people that potted up their plants and didn't do anything with them after that. And the roots grew out through the holes in the bottom of the pots. They got all root bound. You can see this is a root bound plant here that was in a pot way too long. There's another one that's very root bound. It's a temporary thing, putting your plants in the pots, hopefully just for that first growing season. But the nice thing is that you can prepare ahead of time. So say you're going to get 3 different species from the Conservation District. That's 30 plants. You might want to plant some immediately, and some you might want to just pot up. But you can have your pots ready ahead of time with some potting soil, and just get those roots covered, and you'll be good to go. You want to, if you do pot them up, you want to prepare basically your own little mini nursery site, which is protected from the wind and not too sunny, and is right near a water source, because they're going to have to be watered throughout the summertime. Okay. And if you don't have pots and you're not able to get the plants planted in their final destination right away, what you might want to do is heal them in. So just find a spot in your garden where it's easy digging and a little bit protected, and there's a water source, and you can dig a trench and you can quickly stick those plants in the trench and get the roots covered. But again, this is temporary, and I've seen people that have done this too. And then eventually there's this little mini forest of plants that are planted like 2 inches apart that grow up when that was meant just to get their roots covered till they could get them out in their permanent homes. So when you if you are going to go plant bare root and also with the potted stock, if you pot them up, you can plant any time of the year with potted stock, as long as you've got irrigation water. If you don't have irrigation water, then just keep them, you've got a little bit of water from your faucet, you can keep them watered in the pots, but not irrigation to plant them out in the field or wherever their permanent home is going to be. Then wait until fall and plant them in fall. But if you can water them at any time, then go ahead and you can plant them anytime out in your landscape as long as you can keep them watered. Now, bare root on stock, on the other hand, when you're ready to go plant them, it's a good idea to put your plants in a bucket of water. What I like to do is I'll take all the plants I intend to plant, and most of what we're selling, you could put several plants in one bucket of water. You stick them in there, and then go out and start digging up the holes. Dig all the holes that you're gonna where you're gonna plant your plants, and then you come back and maybe take a break, and then come back and start planting. By then, the plants have had a chance to soak up some water, rehydrate a little bit, and you don't have to do quite as much watering. And when you're planting hole, you want to dig it at twice the diameter of the roots, and only to the depth that you're going to plant. So you don't want it too deep, otherwise you'll have soil settling and you might get roots that get exposed. Be careful of air pockets in the roots. Try to, if you can, water the soil in as you plant. And if you have a long root or two, rather than trying to cram them into too small of a hole, it's better to prune the big roots off. And then as you plant, you don't want to be adding any soil amendments as long as you have adequate soil that's available there to backfill. But you don't want to create a situation where it's only really good growing conditions right in this one little hole here. You want to encourage the plant to send its roots out into the native soil there. Mix, if you do have to add some topsoil because you have too rocky a soil, you want to mix it in with the native soil a little bit. Don't create a pot basically in bad soil. Water as you're filling it in, so you can get rid of those air pockets, as I mentioned. And then mulch. And if you're planting out in a grassy area, you're probably going to want to use plant protector, those plastic protectors that go around the stem of the plant. That's really important to keep voles out, which like to girdle the plants, and provide some protection from weed whackers too. Can't tell you how discouraging, and I can speak from personal experience, how discouraging it is when you go out to look for the plants that you planted back in March, and it's in May, and there's grass that's grown up, and you can't find them, so you get the weed whacker out, and you find them with your weed whacker. So here's all the ways not to plant, and then there's the proper way to plant there. And this all looks so obvious, but I tell you, I've seen all these different ways that plants get planted. When you've got a lot of plants to put in the ground, you get a little impatient with what you're doing, and you don't dig as big a hole as you should. All right, site preparation, very quickly. Different ways to do it. Scalping, if you've got a lot of plants to put out in say a grassy area, you're probably just going to want to scalp and plant in the center. You might do some cultivation to try to get rid of the competing vegetation on say a city lot or a small area around your house. I'm a big advocate for sheet composting, and I'll show you another slide for that. That's basically just covering up and smothering the existing vegetation that's out there. You can use cardboard, you can use construction paper, you can roll it out, and then you cover it up with mulch, and all of this, the sod or whatever vegetation was there, dies, gets smothered and decomposes, and you get really good growing conditions for your plant. Get rid of that competing vegetation that's out there, and the mulch helps retain moisture as well as inhibiting competition from weeds, and away you go. Then that gives a leg up for your plants, and they can take off and be successful. The downside of sheet composting is it requires a lot of labor. You got to spread all that mulch out. If you're doing a large area, you don't do the compost. I mean, you don't do the cardboard or construction paper. You just do a twice as thick layer of mulch. And if you're doing a large area, I recommend you have it trucked in. And if you don't have a tractor, you hire someone with a small tractor and have them spread it for you. It'll save you a lot of back pain, and it'll get done very quickly. And this is the best way to get a site prepped to have a successful planting, and the plants will be as happy as can be, and they'll grow very quickly. And then you don't have to worry about the weeds. And eventually all this stuff will decompose, but by then and disappear. But by then the plants will be tall, and they'll be providing their own leaf litter to provide their own mulch. And just a little bit about maintenance. Mulch is your best insurance. It conserves water, keeps the soil temperatures moderated, not too hot, not too cold, inhibits competing vegetation, improves the soil, both organic matter and fertility. And then with new plantings, you're probably going to have to water until established through the summertime for maybe as much as the first 3 years. And when you do water, you want to water the entire root zone, and do it deep but infrequent, so you encourage the roots to grow out into the neighboring soil. And just a little tip about natural landscaping. There's a concept called cues to care. So if you incorporate little elements into your landscaping that give the observer the impression that what they see is intentional, you can get away with a lot. It's a psychological thing that so imagine when you go out in a park or a natural area, you don't judge what you're seeing. And in a cultivated landscape, we tend to be a lot more judgmental. But if you see these little cues to care, could be just a little fence, could be a pathway, a birdhouse out somewhere, or a bird feeder. It tells the observer that what they see is managed and cared for and intentional, and it completely changes your outlook on things. And you can have, so on one side of that, say, fence, it's more manicured. The other side, doesn't matter what's on the other side. It's supposed to be that way. It's all about expectations. Okay, where can you get plants? Well, we're doing this little workshop here because we're doing our annual plant sale, and which we'll be accepting orders through January 28th. Pickup day will be February 26th, and all that information's available on our website. But if you only want a few plants, go to the nurseries and say, you might be saying, well, yeah, but they don't sell native plants. Well, they're probably not selling native plants because nobody's asking for them. You go there and you don't see what you're looking for and you leave. If you want native plants, go to the nursery and ask for them. They can get them. There are wholesale nurseries that specialize in native plants. They can stock them if people ask for them. But if people aren't asking for them, they're not going to know that there's any demand. So don't wait for the Conservation District plant sale. Go to the nurseries. And for more information, you can email me. My email's right here. I'd be happy to give you some tidbits if you have some specific questions about what I've talked about today. For years, I did a natural landscaping course in Clallam County that each spring and fall. That was 6 sessions, 3 lectures, and 3 field trips. Everything we just covered tonight, but spread over 3 lectures and then and with the field trips as well. I'm hoping that COVID will go away, as we all are, and I'll be able to start doing that again. And I'd also like to do field workshops where we specialize in everything I just showed you in going through all those plants, but actually looking at them out in the field, walking around, having a nice outing, instead of looking at these boring slides. Okay, Scott wants to know if we'll be emailing the slideshow. We'll be posting it on our website. So I'll leave you with a little inspiration here, and if there are any other questions, I will do my best to try to answer them. I got off a little slow, and then I had to rush it towards the end. Lots of great information. Thank you, Dick. And if you don't have any questions right now, but you do come up with some questions later, again, you can just email me and that'll work. Yep, deer will eat everything. We're in cahoots with the deer. It helps us with our plant sales. All right, thanks everyone for attending.